What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my Week 9 takeaway video because another busy week of college football action is leading to more and more takeaways. Guys, we got some new additions to some playoff races. Some conferences are starting to clean things up, even though there's going to be a lot more chaos that is still going to happen throughout the final 5 weeks of the college football season. We're starting to really narrow things down here and getting into the nitty-gritty of who's a real contender, who is a pretender, and some of the other conference races we have going on across the country. So before we dive on into this video, make sure that if you guys aren't already subscribed and have the bell rung to this channel, because if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, you don't want to miss anything I upload here on this channel. And if you want to help support the channel, you can help interact with it in any way you can, liking, commenting, sharing, or simply taking time out of your day to watch these videos, which you're doing right now, and I greatly appreciate. And just thank you for all the love and support you have continued to show me, not only here, but over on Twitter as well, or X, whatever you want to call it. Please go follow me at TailgateNate29. Gonna try to post a little bit more about games I call, articles I write, things of that nature. Again, still trying to formulate a plan for that, and I know I've said that for the past couple weeks, but been really busy. Still trying to formulate that out. Once I get it formulated, though, you'll see a lot more stuff going up there on the Twitter. But hey, just thank you guys so much for helping to support me. And now let's dive on in to my Week 9 takeaways video. We are going to start off with a couple of general takeaways. Usually I like to do one general takeaway, but this week I have two. And again, you kind of heard me say in the beginning, but the conference races are really coming down to the wire. And we're going to talk more about this later on in this video, so I'm not going to linger too much here. But, I mean, you really are starting to whittle down the teams that really could be true contenders to get into the conference championship games, right? There's, I think, 4 teams left in the Big 12 that only have 1 loss left. I think there's 4 teams in the ACC that have 0 or 1 loss. The SEC is starting to become like that there as well, although that gets a little more complicated. Big 10, a little bit more complicated. You got 3 undefeated teams left within the Big 12 conference. You obviously can't count the Ohio State Buckeyes out of it. They're 1 loss, of course, just to Oregon, and a huge game coming up against the Penn State Nittany Lions this week. That's game of the week. It's going to be the first preview I have up on this channel, hopefully tomorrow. But again, the conference races are starting to come down to the wire, and we're going to get more specific here in just a little bit later on in this video. But what I have really noticed about the conference races this year is that really in all of these conferences, it is still up to this point pretty wide open. There's not just 1 or 2 teams in each of these conferences that are starting to emerge themselves as clear favorites. Maybe 1 in some conferences, but other than that, I mean, this really is one of the most interesting conference races, one of the most interesting college football playoff races that we have seen in recent memory, and I just can't wait to watch how each and every one of these conferences shake out, because there are a ton of massive football games still to take place in each and every one of these conferences. But speaking of the college football playoff, ladies and gentlemen, if my slide would change, there it goes. I'm going to take back what I said last week, and that we could see a 3-loss team in the college football playoff, because after that chaotic week, what was it, week 7, I believe, was just the super chaotic week where we saw absolutely everybody go down. No, maybe it was week 6. I am looking here. Yes, week 6, where we just saw a ton of upsets go down, a ton of near upsets go down. And yeah, we've seen some upsets here and there before, a couple shaky performances, but honestly, I'm kind of backtracking on my previous thought that we might have a 3-loss team in the college football playoff, and now I'm starting to think there are going to be multiple 2-loss teams that get left out of this thing, because when you look at who's towards the top of the rankings right now, again, this is according to the AP poll. I think the first college football playoff rankings are not coming out this Tuesday, but they're coming out next Tuesday. I believe that is the case. Don't quote me on that, but again, you take a look at who's towards the top of the rankings. Lots of undefeated teams still left. Oregon, Penn State, BYU, Iowa State, Indiana, they are all undefeated, and a lot of really good 1-loss teams, and pretty much everybody else there that is inside of the top 13, again, teams that I did not mention there, all only have 1 loss. Bama, you see sitting at 14, they have 2 losses. LSU, they have 2 losses, but even if you go down the wayside, Kansas State has only got 1 loss. Pitt is still undefeated right now. SMU has only got 1 loss. Army is still undefeated right now. They're with Boise State in that group of 5 race. I mean, Washington State and Colorado, it would take a little bit, but now I'm starting to get convinced that we are going to see possibly one, if not multiple, two-loss teams get left out. And dare I say, I know there are still some things that are going to work out, like if everything works out right, BYU and Iowa State could play in a conference championship game. Ohio State and Penn State are going to play this week, and then one of those two would probably go play Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Indiana is still right there within the running to go get into a Big Ten championship game as well. Miami and Clemson are going to be playing each other, and things of that nature. Could we see it might it might ultimately be a guarantee at this point that we see a two-loss team get out, because Colorado, they could finish with two losses and be left out. Same thing with Washington State. Same thing with a Missouri team that somehow is still ranked. Really have no idea how that's going to happen. Obviously, of course, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, one of those three teams, probably more likely than not, going to get left out of the college football playoff field. Could we see a one-loss team get left out of this field? I'm thinking it's entirely possible, because there is a scenario, even though a lot would have to happen, where a bunch of these teams that you see within the top 13 are going to all end up with one loss. Like if Ohio State wins out and then they go win the Big Ten championship game, I mean, then that leaves Ohio State with one loss as a Big Ten champ, Oregon with one loss, Penn State with one loss, Georgia and Texas, they each have one loss right now. A&M has got one loss. One of those two teams, or one of those three teams, I should say, more likely than not, probably going to end up with a second loss somewhere. In fact, Texas and Texas A&M still have to play. More on that in just a second. But isn't it crazy to kind of think that a one-loss team could get left out of the college football playoff field? Normally, in the 4-team days, you could say, yeah, okay, that's absolutely believable. But now, in the 12-team days, you would think that is almost unfathomable. Yet with how the way the nation is shaping out, that is definitely a good possibility. Again, a lot likelier of a possibility that a two-loss team gets left out. Alabama and LSU, one of those teams is going to get a third loss because, well, they have to play each other. Ole Miss has still got some tough games left, but a two-loss team can absolutely be left out of the college football playoff field, if not a one-loss team. I know, I said it sounds crazy right now, but we could see a one-loss team miss the college football playoff. All right, let's now dive into a little bit more specifics and start talking about a couple of the teams we see throughout the nation. I mean, it is clear and obvious right now. Oregon is the bona fide number one team. There are no questions asked. They absolutely throttled Illinois this past week, and really that you could argue was their biggest test left. I know they have to go on the road and play the Michigan Wolverines, which watch out for that one. The Wolverines are capable of pulling off the upset there if Oregon is not careful. Do I think it's going to happen? Well, I'm releasing a preview prediction video on that one. You'll have to wait to find out. But Oregon, just ever since they fixed their offensive line issues and ever since they got that marquee win against the Ohio State Buckeyes, they really have not been stopped, and I really don't see them being stopped. Like, obviously, I think if there is a loss to be found on the schedule, probably going to happen this week against the Michigan Wolverines. Maybe Camp Randall gives them a little bit of trouble, but even without Drew Aller, Penn State was able to go in there last week and get that one done. And then your other two games are against Maryland and Washington, two teams that are just kind of meh within the Big 12 conference this season. Oregon, I don't think really gets super challenged until they get to, I believe it's Las Vegas this year or Indianapolis, whatever site it may be for the Big Ten championship game. Oregon right now just looks like the overall best team. Dylan Gabriel looks like one of the front runners for the Heisman Trophy. He's got a ton of weapons around him. Jordan James is playing really well, rushing for over 6 yards per carry this season. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, even the tight end and Terrace Ferguson, all four of those guys are playing phenomenally since the offensive line has allowed, or I should say, since the offensive line allowed 7 sacks throughout the first 2 weeks of the college football season. They've only allowed 3 since. This is a team that is playing really cohesive football. The defense is flying all over the field. It's getting home with the pass rush. It is forcing turnovers. It is not letting opposing offenses do much of anything. Oregon right now looks like the best team in the country, and I mean, it took them a little bit to kind of round into form here, but there is no question to me that Oregon is the number one team in the entire country right now. Let's move on and sort of talk about some of those conference races that I told you we were going to talk about here in just a little bit. Okay, so the ACC, let's start with them. The ACC and, well, I'll do my general takeaway first. The ACC and the Big 12 are both becoming 4-team races. Now, let me explain why. Obviously, you have the two front runners in the ACC being Miami and Clemson. We already knew that. A lot of people felt like those two teams were going to be on a collision course. And last week, I kind of said not so fast. I'm saying not so fast again this week because SMU and Pitt are right there. Now, when you go over to the Big 12 side, it just kind of seems like, I mean, obviously, BYU, Iowa State, they control their own destiny. If both of those teams are undefeated heading on into conference championship week, then yeah, that's going to be your matchup for a Big 12 championship and a first round bye. The other one assuredly will get into the college football playoff as an at-large bid. But now here comes Kansas State, and if you happen to forget about Colorado, I'm guilty of that as well. I will definitely put some blame or I don't know if blame is necessarily the word that I should use, but I'm gonna sort of slap myself on the wrist a little bit. Colorado's got some college football playoff potential, and they're one of the only 4 teams in the Big 12 Conference that have 1 or fewer losses in conference play. They are in the running to get into a Big 12 championship game. Let's start out with the ACC. Again, Miami and Clemson are going to be those 2 teams you have to talk about, but SMU is right there, and Pitt is right there. I mean, Pitt, I should say all 3 of those teams right now are undefeated in conference play. Pitt and SMU are going to have to play this week. That is an absolutely massive game. You take a look at what Miami has on the schedule. If they don't slip up, they should be able to get into the conference championship game. But Clemson in a couple weeks has got to go on the road to play Pitt. So the Panthers have a couple huge games back to back. There's a world in which there could be really a 4-way tie atop of the ACC, maybe even a 3-way tie for second, because if SMU beats Pitt and then Pitt beats Clemson, well, Clemson and SMU obviously aren't going to play, so there kind of is that ladder there. If Miami wins out, that's a recipe for a 3-way tie. But to me, without a shadow of a doubt, I know Virginia Tech has 1 conference loss, and that's the really only other team in contention. I personally just don't see them making any sort of run. I don't really see them making things interesting, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't win tiebreakers anyway. So the 4 undefeated teams left in ACC play, I think, are still left in the conference championship race. But now when you go over and you take a look at the Big 12 conference, obviously BYU, Iowa State, they control their own destiny. If they win out, they are going to get in to the Big 12 championship game because they're the only 2 undefeated teams left in conference. But Iowa State has still got to play the Kansas State Wildcats, their only loss to the BYU Cougars. And that is the final game of the regular season for both the Cyclones and the Wildcats. Winner of that one likely gets that tiebreaker, or I should say not likely, will get that tiebreaker and likely ends up in the Big 12 championship game because Kansas State already has that tiebreaker over the Colorado Buffaloes. But what if Iowa State slips up somewhere else, happens to beat Kansas State, Colorado wins out? They're sitting at 4-1 in conference right now, and really you look at the rest of their road, on the road against Texas Tech, could be a little tricky. I'd watch out for that one. But overall, then you look at the rest. Utah without Cam Rising at home. It looked like a game at the beginning of the season that Colorado was going to struggle in. Now, who knows? Utah just doesn't seem to have an offense if Cam Rising is not their quarterback. You go on the road to play Kansas. They just played the Wildcats tough, but they have not looked great this season. And then you play an Oklahoma State team that has also been subpar compared to relative expectations for the Cowboys this season. So you go ahead and you take a look at the scenarios in the Big 12 Conference. BYU wins out there, and obviously that really is going to be no questions asked whatsoever. And you take a look at BYU on the road at Utah, Kansas on the road to Arizona State and Houston. Again, couple moments where they could slip up. The Utah game this week could be interesting. On the road against Arizona State could be interesting for the Cougars as well. But you just take a look there at both of these conferences, the ACC and the Big 12. A lot of room for chaos, a lot of room for tie-breaking scenarios still to try to play their way out. And guys, I could not be more excited to find out who is going to be in the running here. Obviously Clemson, Miami look like they're on a collision course, and obviously looks like BYU and Iowa State are on a collision course, but these 4 teams you see on screen, do not count them out. They are going to prove to be hard to beat, and they're not going to go down without a good fight. But my number 1 takeaway from this past week, we are going to go to the SEC. You want to talk about another conference race that really you have no idea what is going to happen, and I haven't even mentioned the Big Ten Conference here in this video because, well, we're going to talk a lot more about the Big Ten Conference next week after Ohio State and Penn State play each other. We're going to learn a lot, but there are 5 teams that have 1 or fewer losses. In Texas A&M, with that win over LSU, you take a look at the rest of their schedule. It's a lot of winnable games. On the road against South Carolina, little tricky. Watch for the upset. But then you have a game against New Mexico State. You're going to win that one. On the road against Auburn, also tricky, but a game that you should win. And then you have Texas at home. But my takeaway is that Texas and Texas A&M could be a play-in game essentially to go to the SEC championship game in Atlanta, because Texas A&M, I know they control their own destiny. I know they're undefeated right now, but even if they lose, or I should say, if they lose that game to Texas, who knows how the tiebreaker scenarios really work out in that case, because there's still a lot of football left to be played. You have LSU still sitting there with one loss. They're still alive. You got to beat Bama. You got to take care of business, but Tennessee is still there. Georgia is still there, and obviously the Texas Longhorns picking up a big road win against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Told you the Commodores would make that one interesting, but Texas did what they needed to do. They got out of Nashville with a win. I think the way that the SEC has been this year and the way things are trending, Texas A&M might get upset, sure, but that Texas and Texas A&M game, because you look at the rest of Texas's schedule, Florida at Arkansas and Kentucky, all games again that they probably should win, although watch out for the Hogs there in that one. And then that road game against Texas A&M at Kyle Field, guys. I think the way things are trending, that's going to be a play-in game to see who goes to Atlanta. If not, if everything works out right, possibly an SEC championship preview, we could see the two teams from Texas. And I mean, come on, you could not write a better story. Texas comes into the SEC. Texas A&M obviously has never won Texas in the same conference. It's kind of part of the reason why they left the Big 12 in the first place, but not really entirely the full reason. They were the only Texas team within the SEC. Then, here comes big bad Texas. They were ranked number 1. They were getting all the media attention in the state and the SEC instead of them. And now with that chip on their shoulder, with this team playing really well, Mike Elko's group has been on a roll this season. I mean, come on. You can't write a better storyline for the final game of the regular season this college football season. I mean, come on. We're going to talk more about the Big 12, or not the Big 12, the Big 10 conference next week, I'm sure, because Ohio State and Penn State again play this week. But guys, conference races are heating up. The college football playoff race is heating up. College football has never been this exciting, at least in my lifetime. I absolutely love it. Let me know what you guys think, and let me know what you guys took away from this week in the comment section down below, if it wasn't already anything that I had said already. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in the next video. Top 25 out later today. Goodbye.